We're going to jump back and we're going to talk about our twisted pair copper network cabling again. And we're going to talk about the wiring standards. And the reason why we're going to talk about this because number one, it is the most popular and most prevalent type of network cabling out there in the networking world today. And number two, for those of you that decide to go in the networking world or pursue a certification, you need to be familiar with these wiring standards because these are how the cables are going to be connected at the end with their plugs, specifically the RJ45 plug. And so we need to understand what these standards are, and all it is, it's the order of how the cables are put into these plugs, and it's nothing more. So all the cables go in here and they go in a specific order, and that's how we identify them as standards. So let's first talk about why we need to have standards, because you could set up your own standard, and so long as the wires are correct on each side, then it's going to work on your network. But there's a specific reason why we have standards in place. And the first one is to have interoperability, that if you go from one network to the next, that it's going to be the same. Or if you have one personnel quit and somebody else comes in, they know exactly how you wired the network and how the cables are set up. So with that said, let's talk about the two standards. So there's two specific standards. There's a 568A and there's a 568B. And between them, they actually work the same on the network. The only difference is how the cables are ordered on them. And 568B is a newer order and a newer standard than 568A. And it is the recommended standard. Now, I don't know why they chose to go with the 568B over 568A. Because they work exactly the same, and you could wire a network with this standard and it would work just fine. But for some reason, people recommend 568B as the standard. And I think it's just choosing one or the other over the other so we all follow that same standard. So let's go ahead and look at the differences. So for the 568A, we have our green-white wire followed by our green wire. Then we have our orange-white followed by our blue. We have our blue-white followed by our orange. And we have our brown-white followed by our brown. Now on the flip side, it's just a little bit different. We have an orange-white followed by an orange, a green-white followed by a blue-white followed by green, a brown-white followed by a brown. So you're going to see some of those wires flipped around. And all you have to remember when you are doing network cabling, if you do go into the networking world, you're going to have to learn how to do this, and it's just, trial by error. It takes you about maybe a couple hours to get the hang of it. That's how long it took me. But all you have to do is memorize the order of these, and it's a specific order that it goes into the RJ45 plug on the end of the cable. And so you just line them up, you make sure that they're nice and straight at the end by snipping off the end, and then you just put them in here, and then you snip it on together. So that's all you do, and you do that on each side of the cable, and then that's considered one of these standards. And since we're going with the 568B in our industry standard, then you would follow that. So that's what the wiring standards are, and it all just comes down to how you plug these plugs onto the end of these cables. Because in the networking world, we don't buy cable pre-plugged together. So if you go to Best Buy, or if you go to Fry's Electronics, or you go to some other electronics store, you can buy a network cable and it's already completed for you. It's already created. It always has the RJ45 plug on the end, and it's ready to go and you can plug it in. But for a lot of companies, they buy big spools of the cable by itself, and they buy a whole bunch of these plugs, and we buy tools to put together. And the IT people and the networking people, in our spare time, we make cables. And the whole reason for that is that it cuts our costs. It's a lot cheaper than having them pre-made by somebody else. You can just do it in-house. You can test them to make sure they work with some testers. And so that's why we need to know this. And just getting back to why they're important again, if we've just all followed the same one, we all know what everybody's using. So number one, it lowers costs because there's no questions on how the cable is going to be set up and how it's going to work. We know that it's going to work on any network. Number two, it increases our interoperability because we know it's going to work on each network. And number three, it decreases our maintenance time, again, because when somebody new walks in, they know how to wire those networks. So if a network cable is broken, they can just plug a new one in, or they can cut it and put a new plug on the end and so forth, and it's going to work. So that's our introduction to copper wiring standards. Now, if you want to know how to put these together, I recommend going to YouTube and just searching for 568B or 568A network wiring standards or how to put a network wire together. It's very simple. You need some specialized tools, a crimper, some wire snips, and so forth, and you can do it. Unfortunately, I don't have a type of high definition camera where I can show you here in this course, just because there's a fine level of detail and you have to see how every wire is put together, and you have to be able to see the different colors on them. So that's going to go ahead and conclude this video. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, see you at the next video.